to the EV group meeting here, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Murali Nathan, who comes from us from BZE, and he's going to tell us about their electric vehicle report. So Murali, welcome tonight, and we look forward to what you've got to share with us.
You don't have a remote, do you? Oh, so I just keep. Okay. Fine. Oh, okay. Where's the camera? Here. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation from Beyond Zero Emissions. Beyond Zero Emissions, for those of you who haven't heard about us, we are a science, engineering and science research-based organization run entirely by volunteers. I'm a volunteer too, though in my other life I'm an electrical engineer as well. Today's presentation on electric vehicles is the 6th in our series of Zero Carbon Australia plans. The other plans are the stationary energy plan, and that's about producing electricity from renewable sources. The buildings plan, which is about making our building stock energy efficient and zero carbon. Then there was a high-speed rail report which laid out the costings and the economic and technical feasibility for high-speed rail between Brisbane and Melbourne along the East Coast. The 4th was the land use report. The 5th was what we call as Australia, the renewable energy superpower. And this is the 6th report that we have launched, and it forms part of a bigger group of plans that involve freight transport and other public transport programs as well. At the beginning, I have to say this, in developing all these plans, we had 6 key areas that we wanted to address. One was that we hope and wish that by the time we transition to all of these plans, we would be 100% powered by renewable energy. The second was that whatever technologies that we used, it had to be off the shelf, proven, commercially available, scalable technology. So we are not talking about something that's in the future. We are talking about technologies that are currently available commercially. The third issue that we always keep in mind in drawing up our plans is that it has to address our energy security. Energy security is very important for any country, and we always make sure that our plans address that. The 4th is that we need to ensure that food and water security is sustained as well. And the 5th point that we include is that we have a very high standard of living that is the envy of the rest of the world, and we need to be able to maintain that high standard of living. So whatever pathway we progress, it should not upset our standard of living. So these are some of the things that we actually keep in mind while developing our plans. And obviously the 6th most important criteria was that we need to make sure that the environmental impact will be maintained, will not be adversely affected by any of the plans that we have. So those are the 6 plans. And I also have to mention that in today's electric vehicles report, there are some things that we considered. We left out other types of vehicles. We looked at only cars used for personal transport in the big cities and towns of Australia, so urban transport, personal transport. And we looked at electric buses for, again, in the public transport sphere in cities. We looked only at 100% electric vehicles. We did not look at hybrid vehicles. We did not look at hydrogen-powered vehicles. There is enough room for hydrogen-powered vehicles in the future, but we are not there yet in terms of the supporting infrastructure. We are already there with electric vehicles, but we are not there yet with hydrogen-powered vehicles. Hydrogen-powered vehicles will definitely play a big part in freight transport. But in this report, we have not included hydrogen-powered vehicles. We have not included hybrid vehicles. We have looked only at 100% electric cars. one of the important things that we did in doing this plan, in terms of outcomes that we wanted to address two questions. We wanted to find the answers to two questions. The question number one that we had was, is 100% zero carbon electric personal transport technically feasible and affordable and doable within 10 years? The second question that we had to address in this report was, how does it compare? How does 100% electric personal transport compare with the existing options that we have in terms of petrol and diesel cars? How does it compare in terms of comfort, in affordability, in a wide range of other factors? So those are the two important questions that we try to address as an outcome from this report. And then people often ask, why this urgency about 10 years? Why do you keep fixating on this 10-year plans? And the reason for that is, we all know that global warming is a serious issue, and we also know that 195 plus countries signed up in Paris last year to do something about it. And the consensus was that a 2-degree rise above pre-industrial levels was something that was not acceptable. We had to be well within that. And in fact, the more important secondary target was, we should try and bring it down to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So that's the kind of targets governments have been talking about around the world. To achieve that, we need to actually reduce emissions from road transport, because that's a very important and easily doable set of things. As you will see from this slide, cars account for 48% of Australia's transport emissions. So it's really easy for us to address that. And 36% of the cars are in the urban space, in the big cities and towns. So that's something that we can actually address very easily. What this means is that within the next 15 to 20 years, it's possible for us to actually move away from fossil fuel cars to 100% electric cars. Several important research institutes around the world, as well as financial policymakers, Bloomberg New Energy Finance Group, all of them speculate that by the year 2025, there would be a significant reduction in the manufacturing of fossil fuel cars, petrol and diesel powered cars. That's why we say that conventional cars have to go. Their timeline is limited. EVs have arrived, and just to give you some figures from Europe, I'm sure most of you might be aware of it as well. In Norway, only 1 out of every 3 cars sold is still a fossil fuel car. 2 out of 3 cars are either 100% electric or a hybrid, like Mitsubishi Outlander, for example. And countries like Netherlands have legislated that there will be no further sales of petrol and diesel powered cars after 2025. Norway is planning to introduce such a legislation. Germany is planning to introduce a legislation saying that from 2030, no more petrol and diesel powered cars. I mean, Germany, the home of BMW and Mercedes-Benz, they are saying that from 2030, we are not going to allow the sale of petrol and diesel powered cars. So that's the way the world is moving ahead. EVs have already arrived. What we looked at in this report is the economics of EVs. How does it compare with fossil fuel cars? And we looked at 3 different cases. We looked at a business as usual. So we don't do anything about EVs. We don't bring about any policy changes. We don't provide any incentives for import or rollout of electric vehicles. So that's a business as usual state. And then we compared it with 2 different scenarios for electric vehicles. One scenario was a very conservative figure in terms of the costings. We assumed high battery costs. We assumed low petrol and diesel costs. We assumed high maintenance costs for electric vehicles. For example, we said that electric vehicles would cost at least 75% as much as a petrol-powered car to maintain. But the reality is it would be a lot less. And we also looked at a lower cost estimate where we looked at figures like 25% for the maintenance compared to petrol and diesel powered cars. So we looked at these 3 different scenarios. And we also looked at the same kind of methodology for electric buses. And we looked at a 20-year space, looked at the costs year on year for 20 years, and then brought it down to a net present value for comparison purposes. And we used a discount rate of 8%, which when we started out seemed like a good idea, but it's actually extremely conservative. You know, the interest rates today are at an all-time low. So 8% is really excessive. It's double what the interest rates are now. And in spite of all those conservative figures, you will see that electric vehicles come out on top. And we looked at the kind of incentives other countries provide. And we said, this is what we need to be doing here in Australia as well. We need to provide financial subsidies. We need to provide subsidies like some countries like China. They give $12,000 per electric vehicle purchase. So if you go out and buy an electric vehicle instead of a petrol or diesel vehicle, the government gives you $12,000. And China is just one of a few countries that gets that. There are other indirect financial incentives, either reduced registration fees or even no registration fees in some jurisdictions, and the allowance to go on bus lanes, toll-free roads, free parking. Those sorts of benefits are given in Norway. So that's the kind of policy incentives we are trying to look at getting in Australia. One of the issues that most people would have is range anxiety. I'm sure most of you probably have an electric vehicle, and some of you might have range anxiety. It's interesting because the Victorian integrated survey for travel and activity, that department actually did a survey of 72,000 trips over a 1-year period, 12-month period, and they found that in Melbourne, 99% of the trips were less than 120 kilometers, and the average mean distance traveled per day per car was only around 36 kilometers. So that fits in very well with existing electric car ranges. But when you look at what's happening around Australia, Tesla have implemented their rapid charging, supercharging network right from Melbourne to Brisbane, so that you can travel along if you use a Tesla car. And I believe they are providing adapters for CHAdeMO as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they are providing. They're not? I thought they were providing adapters for that, but at the moment we do have a little bit of confusion with 4 different high-speed charging systems, which is unfortunate. But as you'll see, the range of electric cars is much more than the median distance traveled every day in Melbourne, and also for 99% of the trips. There's a company, I don't know if you've heard of them, Tritium. It's an Australian company, and their refill charging network in Queensland is about 430 kilometers. They're doing some very good work. They're exporting all over the world with their system, so we could expect to see a lot more around Australia. Electric cars are going to be flooding the market, so we would be very silly to ignore the reality. As you can see from the slide, we have a range of charging networks on the East Coast, and that's continuing to grow. So in terms of the points that we set out at the beginning, we said we need to find out if electric vehicles are technically feasible whether they are affordable and they're doable within 10 years. And we also wanted to know if electric vehicles compare favorably with petrol and diesel cars in terms of performance, in terms of convenience, and so on. All of you who have electric vehicle would appreciate that the performance is significantly better than a petrol or a diesel car. So you don't need to talk to the converted about that. But in terms of convenience, you can have home charging. If you have a solar PV and charge at home or charge during off-peak hours, it's going to be incredibly cheap. It's nice to drive. So we do address the convenience factor. In terms of the economics, we use the following modeling method. We looked at historical car fleet trends, and we looked at the future size and component of the car fleet, and we made a few assumptions on capital costs, operation and maintenance costs, fuel costs, and those those assumptions came from different departments of the government, federal government. So we used two different sets of data, one as a very conservative figure and one for a very low cost figure. So we did the cost comparison of a business as usual with 10-year transition to electric vehicles, urban electric vehicles. And in the higher cost scenario, we looked at higher battery and electric vehicle costs, because right at the beginning we knew that electric cars, the Holden Volt was costing what, like $70,000 when it was launched here. Most people would have been put off by that kind of cost. You know, you can buy a decent petrol-driven car for $35,000, so a Cruise for $35,000. So, but the prices are coming down, and what we know is the battery prices have dropped significantly since the 2010s. So we took a 20-year time frame for a business as usual scenario, and we looked at the costs, and it came to something like $993 billion on the business as usual scenario, where you can see there's the capital cost, which is the cost that you invest in your cars. There's a maintenance cost, operation and maintenance, which includes rego, registration, insurance, and we took certain assumptions. We just took the value for a 35-year-old male driver with zero no claim bonus and those sorts of things. And we compared with EVs with the higher cost scenario, where the batteries are very, very expensive, the cars are very, very expensive, and these are 2014 costs, by the way. Costs have been coming down. And it came out at 25% more expensive than business as usual over a 20-year time frame. And that's not a lot of money, actually, if you think about it. It's less than $20 per capita per week. It's not much. But then it was interesting when we looked at the low cost scenario. The yellow you can see is the batteries being replaced in 10 years. So we just assumed that the batteries would last a maximum of 10 years, they would have to be replaced. The initial spike in the black, that is the capital cost, the high cost of the cars themselves, as well as the charging infrastructure. We assume that for every electric car sold, we assume that the home user would have a level 2 charger at home. And we also assume that there would be at least one new level 2 charger in the city somewhere for every car sold, which is a very conservative estimate. And we also assume that within a 5-kilometer radius within the urban center, there would be at least one rapid charger with 10 units. Again, these are extremely conservative figures. It may not actually require that many. But in the lower cost scenario, we came out at the same. It was cost neutral with business as usual. What we didn't actually consider in this report was the intangible benefits of moving to electric vehicles. We know that petrol contains benzene and toluene. It's used as additives in refining to remove the knocking effect. And benzene and toluene are cancer causing. They actually alter the DNA structure of the body. So it's extremely carcinogenic. A lot of people die from pollution-driven problems every year. That's something that's not actually covered in this report. We didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about the noise pollution, the health benefits of not having all those emissions, and we didn't talk about other intangible benefits as well. So a rapid shift to urban electric cars operating on renewable electricity eliminates 6% of our emissions in the cities. That's something worth striving for. We also looked at a possibility in the future where you would have a large number of youngsters today don't actually want to own a car. That's the trend worldwide. In cities like New York, 50% of the people don't have a car, and it's the same in London and Berlin. The younger generation probably feel that they have more important things to do with technology. They would rather not have a car. Car share has become the very important part of the younger generation, and the future is also with driverless cars. We don't know how it's going to work out, but we estimate that there would be a falling off in total car population. So that's the redundancy. The yellow is actually the redundancy, because we will have a lot less cars on the road. We use the same kind of methodology for the buses as well, for electric buses in the cities. And here we found that in a business as usual scenario, electric buses are 10% more expensive because of the higher initial capital costs. We have actually a company in Geelong that's manufacturing electric cars, and they set a record. A trip from non-stop trip from Melbourne to Sydney. I don't know if you read about that. Yes, it's just amazing. We are able to actually export our intellectual property worldwide. So, the loss of Ford in Broadmeadows is going to be compensated hopefully by Geelong. So, yes, the initial cost is going to be expensive, but it's worth doing it. It's only 10%. 10% in a bus works out to something like 72 cents per week per person. Nothing much, it's worth doing. But if you actually look at a more realistic figure, assuming that with falling prices of batteries and falling prices of the as we scale up the manufacturing, the prices are going to fall. We see that electric buses will be 12% lower than business as usual, and that's again a fantastic reason to go forward. So rapid shift to electric cars and buses operating on 100% renewable electricity is doable in 10 years. The additional benefits: we avoid our carbon emissions, we have an improved urban environment with reduced noise and air pollution, and we have energy security. This is something very important a lot of people don't think about. All our petrol and diesel is imported. Almost all of it is imported, and we import it from countries that are constantly having some war or other. All that it takes is for the Middle East to shut down because of some kind of problems they have, which they always seem to have, and we have only 3 weeks supply. We have only 3 weeks supply of petrol and diesel. So that's not a good situation to be in. We don't have energy security. With electricity and electric powered cars, we don't depend on anyone else. And it actually improves the electricity grid as well. As you can see from the slide, which was in Sydney in January, the peaks are the those are the peak demands, and these are the low points. The electric cars can be charged during those troughs. So with smart grids, something that Standards Australia is working on, they are working on smart grids and future grids, the ability for cars to actually return back power to the grid when the grid is having a peak demand, and then resupply to the cars when there is excess supply on the grid. That's something that's being looked at as a future scenario. And that's the way the grid will be, the future grids will be. Standards Australia are already working on that. And what we will get as a car user is a monthly statement that says how much of power have we taken from the grid for our car, how much of power have we transmitted to the grid. And it won't be like what we are doing with our solar PVs. We are getting 6 cents per unit, which is the feed-in tariff is worthless today. But with cars, it's going to be different. And what we've seen is that the additional demand because of electric cars on the grid is not going to make a huge dent in our power supply, because it will be charged through smart, time-based, demand-based charging. The last bit that I want to talk about is the incentives and policy. Australia needs to reduce or remove taxes on the import of electric cars, just like other countries do. We need a level playing field. We need to transition government fleets to electric. At the moment, car emission standards are pretty low. We need to make them more strict so that we have a level playing field once again. Like Norway, we could lower or eliminate registration fees for electric cars, allow access to transit lanes, and plan new car parks and apartments with charging infrastructure, and set state and national electric vehicle targets. Every parking meter needs to be also doubling up as a charging station in the CBD, just like in Europe. That's what we need. So that concludes my presentation. So we've actually answered the question whether it's doable. Yes, it's doable. Whether it's comfortable. Yes. All we need is policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. After that wonderful presentation, we have a few formalities. Every year we have to re-elect branch members. Unfortunately, our convener, Paul, couldn't be here tonight. He would normally take on these duties. In his stead, I will try and make do. So we have 3 formal positions. We have 3 formal positions that are always open. Those are the convener, whose responsibilities involve helping to arrange presenters for the seminars, often involves introducing them, thanking them, general organizing. We also have the secretary, that's myself at the moment, who simply is responsible for sending out email notifications. There's wonderful notifications that you get, sometimes not very long before the event. And the third position is treasurer, which in my opinion is one of the most involved positions, which is currently David. So first of all, there's also a few open positions just for general committee members. Mario and, just you, Mario, no one else here today? There's Clint as well, who's not here today. Felix. Okay, so we'll first of all, I suppose, take nominations for. We'll start with convener.
I nominate Paul.
Well, that's good because Paul's already accepted. Does anybody else want to nominate someone? No? Nominate yourself? No? All right. All those in favor of Paul? Good, thank you. So nominations for secretary. All right. I accept the nomination. Yes. Any other nominations? Anybody else want to take over from me? No one? Formalities. Thank you. All right. For treasurer, Nominations? Well, I can nominate David. I'm pretty sure. Right? Do you accept? Good. All right. Thank you. All right. Is anybody interested in being on the committee? It generally involves helping us make decisions, helping us organize things. We meet every few months generally. A lot of it is to do with organizing the EV Expo yearly these days. Occasionally we will deal with issues around the actual running the seminars as well, although that's fairly hands-off these days. Anybody interested? I'm assuming that anybody who is on the committee is already willing to stay on the committee, unless they've told me otherwise. All right. Given the way this process works, you are accepted. Thank you. Well, you're welcome to vote. Yeah, there we go. Formalities. All right, well, I suppose, thank you. Yeah, I hope that's all I'm meant to do. Existing committee members. Well, as I said when you were talking, I assumed that anybody who hasn't already told me that they don't want to be a committee member, given there's only you in attendance, is going to stay a committee member. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, due to formalities, there are no biscuits.
Where's Michael?
Don't know, unfortunately. So that will conclude the evening. You're welcome to stay and chat, but that will be all.